was on the conservation status and the vegetation communities and species of the Aeolian calcarenite of the west coast of Flinders Island. So what does that mean? So essentially, you have the island, and the base of it is granite, and a bit like Wilson's Promontory, but slightly pinker, I'd say.
Right.
And then when the Bassian Plain was down, when the sea levels were a lot lower, there used to be a big sand plain there, and the prevailing winds would blow the sand across the plain, and that sand formed sand dunes down the west coast of Flinders Island. And so they're really highly alkaline because they're made of shells, because they come off the sea floor effectively. And so they're all highly like a form of limestone because they're all full of shells. And then as the seas rose and those sand dunes effectively became harder, they formed a limestone. So you often have the granite, and then you'll have this limestone that sits on top of it. And it's quite unusual in Tasmania. So that's its southern extent is Flinders Island. So it's not found any further south. And because of that, the soils are really interesting that form on it. So they're really highly alkaline. Which means you get a whole lot of threatened species or unusual plants. So that was part of the reason why Professor Jamie Kirkpatrick wanted me to study it, was because it hadn't been studied before, and also it would have a lot of unusual and rare and threatened plant species, which it did. And then we also looked at the vegetation communities, and then we had a look at how well those particular plant species and communities were reserved in terms of Tasmania. So my work actually led to some areas on the west coast being protected in formal reserves, yeah.
So what sort of plants, species did you see there? Well,
it depends, and that's the other thing I was looking at is okay. So if you've got vegetation communities growing on the coast, and then you've got other communities growing elsewhere on the Aeolian, on the highly alkaline soils, why do you get some communities growing in one particular area and other communities growing somewhere else? So I was looking at what it was that caused different vegetation communities to grow up out of the same soil type. So for example, it'll be distance from coast, so as well as the soil depth, aspect, so that kind of thing. So where are the Alocasuarina verticillata forests growing, and where are the heaths growing, that kind of thing. So a lot of the heath that you'll find along, it's called calcarenite heath, I think they call it, or heath on calcarenite, they call it in Tasmania. So that's that low, bushy kind of windswept. It's got a lot of threatened species in it and quite diverse for Flinders. And then you've got the communities like the Alocasuarina verticillata forest, so the beautiful drooping she oak forests that you get on Flinders Island. I mean, you do get that elsewhere too, but you see them. It's one of my favourite things about Flinders is walking through those beautiful, almost 100% cover of drooping she oak. And then there was other communities that had eucalypts in them, and so there was quite a variety of vegetation communities.
And they're being protected?
So there was a lot of what they call unallocated Crown land on Flinders Island.
Yes.
So when I finished my honours project, I was actually approached by the state government for a job, which was to look at all the areas of unallocated Crown land on Flinders Island. And I think that Jamie Kirkpatrick would have known that, and that's part of the reason why he suggested I studied it, because he knew that this assessment was coming with all this unallocated Crown land. Was it going to be made? Was it going to be put into private hands? Was it going to be reserved? If it was going to be reserved, what status of reserve should it have? So my honours thesis work helped inform some of the understanding of the unallocated Crown land, and on that basis, I was actually writing a report about how they should be protected because of these particular values. So. I worked. It was done by a state government process, basically.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And so it's preserved, it's reserved, and it's protected.
Yeah. Some of it was on private land.
Yeah.
And so some of that private land actually now has a covenant on it. but some of them won't. Like our land on Flinders Island, for example, has a conservation covenant on it, and it protects some of that special heath on calcarenite and other communities on calcarenite, whereas others would be more vulnerable to change in terms of land clearance and that kind of stuff. But then some of the public land ended up in formal reserves, which is, which will be great for future generations.
Yeah. It's interesting because the population of Flinders Islands varies between 900 and 1,000, 1,200 people.
Yeah.
Coming going.
Yeah, well, I think there's been a big shift on Flinders since post-COVID with tourism. So I think the island's going through some changes, and it's been very popular. But I think as people are able to travel internationally, and then that might shift. Flinders, we sort of feel like was discovered a lot more during that time.
But we don't want it discovered too much.
No, well, that's why
I didn't say that.
Yeah, I don't ever post stuff on social media from Flinders. It's just such a special place.
It is. It's beautiful. And there's a beach down one end, and it's beautiful white sand. Trousers Beach.
Yeah.
Beautiful beach. Yeah. Now let's move on. That's fascinating. Now, did that inspire you to be more creative and use those species in your artwork? What is it that inspired you to become an artist as such? I know you did photography, so you would have been madly photographing everything that you were doing. Do you reflect back on those photos and think, I want to paint that now?
No. So essentially what happened was when I left university, I kind of woke up. I worked for Forestry Tasmania and woke up to what was going on with our old growth forests in Tasmania. And it was that point that I decided I wanted to study science. So between my undergrad and my honours year, I went and lived in South America and worked on the forests there in Chile, and worked for a big pulp and paper company in Brazil, just to see what was happening elsewhere. So I was very much, part of the reason why I wanted to do that was to get some kind of more global understanding around the value of our cool temperate rainforests in Tasmania, and how incredible we have the tallest flowering plant in the world in Tasmania. And so I was very much set on conservation and wanting to see Tasmania really look after its, especially its vulnerable tall forests that were being and are still being logged, and in the Tarkine especially. So
makes me sad.
Yeah, so I actually got arrested in the Tarkine, and because
how was that?
It was interesting. I was in my early 20s at that point, but the reason why I went to South America was to get an idea of the cool temperate rainforests that were in Chile, that used to be connected to Tasmania, just to get that perspective. So I was definitely on this kind of beeline of wanting to ensure that Tasmania looked after its natural heritage. And it wasn't until the last 10 years that I really went back to my creativity. So I think, so I did my honours year, and then I worked with the state government for probably 10 years in natural resource management, and then got fed up with state government and the direction of the state government, basically, and then went and worked in federal parliament for the Greens for 4 years.
Right. And the difference between state and federal and working for the Greens, what was it like? Well,
I kind of began to realise that working for the state government, we would make recommendations that would go to the minister, and then it would, and I'd have, in situations, I'd have all the key players in the room, which would be unusual. Like, you wouldn't always be able to get all those people together to agree on something. This was to do with firewood management. And, we felt like we had a good solution for a big kind of problem. And it just got to ministerial level, and that, just gets not dealt with, or, it's political.
It is political,
it's
isn't
political.
it?
And so it made me realise that it's the politics where the decisions are made. And that's when I thought, well, maybe I'll go and work in politics and see what that's like.
And get a different perspective. But how different was it there than where it was in state?
Well, it was interesting because I worked for Christine Milne, who then became the leader of the Australian Greens, but that didn't happen until after I left. I think she was deputy at that time, for part of that time. And it was during the pulp mill campaign, which was massive. And it was just, Christine was just really starting to talk about climate and energy, and Tasmania certainly wasn't ready for that discussion or issue. And so that was interesting. So my role was to manage Christine's constituent issues as well as her local campaigns, and one of those was climate, because that was her main focus nationally. But Tasmania wasn't ready for that. You know, as we've seen, it's taken a long time for the electorate to actually really begin to get a grasp for what's going on. So,
and they will have a grasp for some of what's going on, but they won't have a grasp for all of what's going on behind the scenes, will they?
No, that's right.
Mm.
So, so it was really interesting though, working in federal parliament and just seeing how it all works. And so I'm very interested in politics, but was ready to stop after 4 years. It was very demanding,
very intense.
Yeah.
And it would have taken a lot of your energy and a lot of work, and you would have gotten frustrated a lot for things that you were working toward making happen and they never happen, or some may have. And you don't even have to be in politics to know that.
No, that's right. But really, I see myself as a part of a continuum where you can help, from my perspective anyway. You can do your bit as much as you can, and then I think that's part of my where my role is as an advocate. I think I'll always have that part of myself in me, but I get approached quite a lot to run for parliament, and it's not where I necessarily I don't want to be. So it's definitely given me that kind of experience of knowing that at this stage in my life, I don't want to make my kind of advocacy contribution through the political sphere, but I also know how critically important politics are, and especially in Tasmania, as it is everywhere. But so some of the advocacy I do now is, in my view, is really thwarted by the politics of the day.
I'm not even going there. I'm not going there. We could have hours of conversation on that.
Yeah.
And it is frustrating. And, with the election that's just come and gone, and the results and things were quite interesting. And I feel like there need to be more women in there who are really focused and know what they're fighting for. And it is a fight, because when you enter politics, you can go in as a politician and be elected and know what you want to do, but you have the surrounds around you which can beat you down pretty quick smart. And that's what happens to a lot of people in politics, who have the right intention when they go in, but at the end they're just so frazzled and so worn down that they just can't do it anymore, because it's not in their belief to continue. And that's really very sad.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why the culture of politics needs to change. And I guess part of what we're seeing in the last federal election was a move towards that. So, I think role of women in parliament is one thing. Women being treated a lot better is part of that. But I also think political donation reform and having a national integrity commission and have that transparency in parliament is really critical, because otherwise as we know, if you're making donations, of course, you're not going to make the same decisions as you would if you weren't. So yeah, so I think there's a spotlight on all that, and I feel like a part of the Planning Matters campaign that I work on here is around transparency in decision making. And so I think that's what needs to happen at all levels of government. And I think because we've had that, by and large, two-party system where it serves their best interest, not necessarily to have that same level of transparency. It's that's just hopefully going to shift.
Well, let's hope it shifts, because the transparency needs to be there. And I think the politicians need to understand what they're there for. And it's not to fight amongst themselves and
Exactly.
abuse each other. It's actually working for the country and the people in the country who have voted them in, with faith or not faith. And the transparency is a very important component to that.
Yeah.
And if there's anyone who's excuse me, donating or, wanting to help make the country better, there should be that transparency there for where their donations or whatever they're doing goes to. And so that we, as the consumers, can see it and understand it and see where the integrity and the fairness is of whatever's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an excellent outcome, I think, and I'm really pleased. Having worked in, especially so long ago now, I left federal parliament in 2005. No, 2009. I started in 2005. At last, seeing the electorate understand around climate and seeing through all those some of the bigger players who have really corrupted, I see all the issues and thwarted good decision making. I finally feel like the electorate, through the tragedy, unfortunately, of fire and flood, are beginning to see the beginning of climate and the climate changing and what it's going to mean for us as individuals and families and communities and states and countries and us.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting, the floods that were here, in certain parts of Victoria, and how they devastated the land and the farmers and all the things that they have to pick up. And when the water sits on the land for a certain period of time, you have to recultivate that land from scratch again, to make it get to where it was before the flood came. And the fencing and all the I was walking through this farm at the weekend and looking at all the debris that was left behind from the floods, and the depth of the flood in certain areas was incredibly scary, I would say, and the rush of the water, because I always say the water has no boundaries, so it will find a way to go wherever it wants to go. It doesn't matter what's in the road, and it will take with it whatever it wants to take with it. So looking at that and having an appreciation of the land and the landowners and what they have to go through, and they're usually prepared for lots of things and the changes of weather and the droughts and the floods and the fires and things, but there are certain things you cannot control. And I just say they have so much dedication, and they're amazing people.
Yeah, resilient.
Very resilient, and they just keep pushing through and repairing and regrowing and regeneration and all this sort of stuff. It's wonderful to see.
Yeah.
So I'm just learning about all these sorts of things and experiencing it and having conversations with people. So it's a different side of where I come from.
Yeah.
Because I'm a city girl.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think we can see that urban-rural divide in so many ways. And,
very much.
Very much. Yeah, but the majority of people will be living in cities and urban areas. But the people who are feeding us,
and the people that are feeding us, we can start a conversation after we come back from the break.